Hey everyone, welcome back to Rugby From The Stands. As you can probably tell, this is going to be a slightly different video. There are no charts today, there's no statistical analysis of any games. I've just completed the long haul flight from Singapore and have finally landed on South African soil. And if I'm being truly honest, I'm feeling a little bit emotional. Obviously, this trip is about rugby. It's about the rivalry between the All Blacks and the Springboks. But it's also about experiencing South Africa and its people, its culture, and its history. But there's also something deeply personal about being here for me, because I'm now standing in the country where my own relationship with the All Blacks really began. Many of you have asked me over the last year since I started this channel where I'm originally from. My face, my name, and my accent seems to throw people off. And I've kept that part of my identity deliberately ambiguous until now. I wanted people to focus on the analysis first. I wanted the work to stand out on its own and for people to judge the data and the content before judging the person delivering them. But after landing here in South Africa, it felt like the right time to open up and share a little bit more about who I am, where I come from, and why this game means so much to me. So, drum roll, please. I was born and bred in Sri Lanka. I lived there for the first 23 years of my life, and I went to a school known more for its rugby in Sri Lanka than perhaps any other sport, Isipatana College. And during recess, instead of playing cricket, we played touch rugby with whatever we could find. We had a lot of mango trees in Sri Lanka and around the school, so quite often we would use a dried mango seed as the rugby ball, and that is how we played. And let me be clear, I am not unique in Sri Lanka. Sometimes people outside the country don't realize just how much rugby is played there, particularly around Colombo and Kandy. There are thousands of Sri Lankans with stories just like mine who grew up playing rugby, watching rugby, and falling in love with teams from the other side of the world. For me, that team was the All Blacks. My first proper memory of a Rugby World Cup was in 1995. I was only 9 years old. There was obviously Jonah Lomu. There was the black jersey. There was the silver fern and the haka. And there was this way the All Blacks played rugby that completely captured my imagination. Then came the World Cup final at Ellis Park, South Africa against New Zealand. The All Blacks lost, and I cried myself to sleep that night. At 9 years old, I didn't understand the full political or social significance of what I had just watched. I didn't understand what that victory meant to South Africa at that particular moment in its history. But I remembered Madiba walking onto the field wearing the Springbok number 6 jersey. I remember him presenting the World Cup to François Pienaar. That image stayed with me even before I was old enough to understand everything that it represented. Home for me has changed several times since then. When I was 23, I left Sri Lanka and moved to Oxford in the UK. In 2011, I watched the All Blacks lift the World Cup for the first time in 24 years. I watched that final at home with my brother, who I was living with at the time. That was a very, very special day. A few years later, I moved to Dubai. And in 2015, I watched the All Blacks become the first team to win back-to-back Rugby World Cups. That time, I was in the office by myself, and I remember running around the office and celebrating like a crazy person, with absolutely no one else there to celebrate with me. Then, over 9 years ago, I moved to Singapore. That is where I live now. That is where my wife and children are. That's the place our family currently calls home. So, home has changed over the years for me. Sri Lanka, Oxford, Dubai, and now Singapore. But since I was that 9-year-old kid watching the 1995 World Cup, the All Blacks have remained one of the constants in my life. Now, a lot of you have assumed that I'm some kind of a statistician or a data scientist, and I want to say that I'm not. I work in marketing strategy, so I do a fair bit of performance and digital marketing. So that's things like search engine optimization, paid media, social media, and digital analytics. And When you work with large enterprise clients, particularly in the financial services sector like banking, you quickly learn that having data alone isn't enough. You can put an enormous spreadsheet in front of a group of senior bankers, but that doesn't mean that they are going to agree with you. So if you want your agenda pushed, you need to back it up with data, but you also need to know what the data is actually telling you. So you need to find the insight, connect that insight to a decision, and then tell the story in a way that people can understand. So I work with a lot of great data people who are far, far more smarter than I am and far more nerdier than I am, if you can believe that. They are actually qualified. They've got the certifications and the technical capabilities that I don't have. But what I've learned to do is to identify information that matters and put it in front of decision makers in the way that makes sense to them. So that is the transferable skill that I've brought into this channel. Before starting this channel, I used to share some of my rugby opinions and takes on social media. And because people can see that I either have lived in Colombo or that I have friends with Sri Lankan sounding names and that I'm based in Singapore right now, the reaction was usually, what do you know about rugby? Stick to cricket, mate. And the funny thing is, I don't even like cricket. So when I started Rugby from the Stands, I decided to let the data, the content speak first. I wanted people to see the analysis before they looked at my background. And the response has been something I'm genuinely grateful for. A large part of the audience on this channel comes from New Zealand and South Africa. These are two of the most knowledgeable, passionate, and opinionated rugby audiences in the world. And you've embraced someone who is genuinely an outsider, someone who's found his way into this rugby community purely through his love for the game and his love for the All Blacks. If you think about it, I'm just a dude who recently turned 40, sitting in a bedroom, trying to combine the things that I've learned about data and storytelling with the game that I love. And somehow, this community has grown around that. So I don't take that for granted. And I also don't think that New Zealanders should ever underestimate the power of the All Blacks jersey, the pull of that All Blacks jersey that can travel. It was powerful enough for a German kid called Anton Segner to travel across the world, leaving his family behind for a chance to pursue that dream in New Zealand. It was powerful enough for a Dutch kid called Fabian Holland, who moved to New Zealand when he was just 16. Both of them eventually became All Blacks. And then there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world who may never wear that jersey, but who still feel a profound connection to its mana and its wairua. I am one of those people. And there are thousands more like me in Sri Lanka. Last year, I was fortunate enough to travel to New Zealand with my family. At the time, this channel had fewer than 50 subscribers, so not many people actually saw that video that I made about that trip, but it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. We visited the All Blacks experience. We traveled to Eden Park for Adi Savea's 100th test. We walked into Eden Park, me and my family, along with the poster that I designed for Adi's 100th test, got featured on NZR Plus for a millisecond, which I will treasure for the rest of my life. We heard the anthems and we watched the haka together as a family. We took photographs with some of the players, and my children got to experience a small part of something that had meant so much to me since I was a child myself. We also traveled to Rotorua and had the opportunity to experience Maori culture. That trip brought together so many different parts of my life: Sri Lanka, New Zealand, rugby, and my family. I'll link to that original video for anyone who would like to watch it, because I think it'll mean something slightly different now that you know the full story behind it. This South African journey is going to be different. I'm traveling solo this time. My wife is back home in Singapore with our 2 children, and we're only weeks away from welcoming our 3rd. Obviously, I miss them so much already, but they know how much this journey means to me. And I'm incredibly grateful for the way my wife has supported me and this hobby of mine that technically doesn't really bring any return financially to our family just yet. So although I've come here alone, I'm carrying them with me in spirit. I'm excited, but I'm also a little bit terrified. I'm a little bit of an introvert, so walking around, speaking to strangers and putting myself in front of a camera doesn't really come naturally to me, but this channel has forced me to push myself outside my comfort zone. And now it has brought me all the way to Johannesburg, the exact same city where in 1995 I watched Madiba walked onto the field wearing that Springbok number 6 jersey. In a couple of days, I will be standing at the exact same ground where it all happened, Ellis Park, the place where South Africa won its first Rugby World Cup, the place where Nelson Mandela handed the trophy to François Pienaar, the place where a 9-year-old Sri Lankan boy watched the All Blacks lose, cried himself to sleep, and without realizing it, began a relationship with this rivalry that would follow him for the rest of his life. And now, 31 years later, that little boy has somehow made it here. It's actually a little bit difficult for me to process. South African rugby has always been a huge part of the All Black story, and therefore it has been a huge part of my story as well. This rivalry is one of the reasons I fell in love with the game, and South Africa has also shown the world how rugby can represent something far greater than what happens during 80 minutes on a field. As a Sri Lankan, I understand what representation can mean. That is why seeing names like Imad Khan and Yakin Ahmed on a Stormers team sheet really stood out for me. This is a very different South African team, a very different South Africa 31 years later. It is the same reason such as Siya Kolisi, Adi Savea, and Jonah Lomu become bigger than the sport. Somewhere, there is a child watching them from a place the rugby world doesn't always pay attention to. A child in somewhere in rural South Africa, in Sri Lanka, in Germany, the Netherlands, or somewhere else entirely. And that child is beginning to believe that this game might belong to them too. So after keeping my background in the shadows for the first year of this channel, I think it feels appropriate to finally introduce myself properly. And I'm going to take some inspiration from the Maori tradition of pepeha. Now, I should start by saying that this isn't a proper pepeha. I'm not using the correct template and the correct stereo Maori words, but I've been inspired by it. And I feel that it's appropriate because I should begin with the land and the places and the people who have shaped me. So here goes. Tēnā kātou, tēnā kātou, tēnā kātou katoa. The land that birthed and formed me was Sri Lanka. I was born and raised there, and it was my home for the first 23 years of my life. The school that shaped my love for rugby is Isipatana College. The lands of Oxford and Dubai became important chapters in my journey. The island nation of Singapore is the place that I now call home. I'm the husband of a beautiful and incredibly supportive wife. I'm the father of 2 beautiful children, with our third only weeks away. I'm a marketing strategist, a data storyteller, and a rugby fanatic. And I have always been an All Black supporter since I was 9 years old. My name is Shad Hamid. Norera, tēnā kātou, tēnā kātou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.